This panel is called Afro Tech Superstars, Crafting the Future, right? So we're talking about how groundbreaking technologies can impact the future of the continent that we all love. And we're talking about Afro tech talent in the youngest continent in the world. And we've got 24 minutes to do that in. So let's get started. Okay, let me introduce you to your panelists. To my immediate left is Bosun Tijani. He's Nigeria's new Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy. Next to Bosun is Christine Souffrant-Ntim, who's a serial entrepreneur, I would call you, right? You're an award-winning Haitian-American Ghanaian tech ecosystem expert. You're like the United Nations in one person, right? For emerging markets. Now, she was in banking and then non-profit development. And then she started her tech career as the founder of Vendedi, which was connecting tourists, people, with food vendors, street vendors, via a digital database. You'll tell us about that. And now she's doing a lot of other things in the tech space, which she'll tell us about. Our final speaker has done so much for Africa. He's a dear friend of mine over the past few years. But you'll be forgiven if you you're not very familiar with his work, because I call him the quiet genius. Dr. Edem Adzogenu. He's not one to hog the limelight, but he's been a tremendous pioneer of some groundbreaking initiatives to promote, to progress, and to protect Africa. He's an accomplished surgeon, and he co-founded Afro Champions Initiative, which is a public-private platform for the private sector to work with governments. He was the AU lead in the AFCFTA process, private sector lead, and he helped advocate the AFCFTA. He was like an evangelist. He went all around Africa pushing the AFCFTA with governments. And he was also very much involved when COVID hit, in terms of creating and applying digital solutions that got us through those dark days. So there's Edem for you, and that's your team. So we're talking about tech. I'm going to work my way down here. Very different Unga for you, my friend, right? You've gone from advocating and telling policymakers they should do this to being the policymaker who's told to do this. So just tell me, what's your Unga been like?
Exciting. I think I was here last year. I was in the audience as well, and it was good to be part of this particular event and a few others as well. But I think being on the other side and just seeing the power and the strength that is all around New York at this time, and what we can actually make happen for our people is reassuring. Because I think Africa is going through a very special time. Many people look at it with a lot of challenges, but what we're really going through is a continent that is resource rich, but is desperately looking for ways to diversify. And when you're talking diversification, you're thinking productivity.
Yes.
Right? Because how do you ensure that all our sectoral activities are being done optimally so that we can compete? And you can't talk productivity without talking technology. And so at the same time, we have a population of a lot of young people who are digital native, very conversant with technology, itching and eager to build solutions. So I think we're onto something extremely exciting, and gatherings like this can provide the momentum to help make that happen.
And we saw your fellow minister, the Minister of Finance, talking about what Nigeria's plan is for the future. And the big word that jumps out is investment. Right? You have to invest in this. How do you invest in technology and all these young people? What is investment? Where does it come from? And how is it applied to catalyze what we know is the raw talent that we have in Nigeria?
I think they didn't just talk about investment. They also talked about domiciling how we produce.
You mean localization, value addition on ground, not exporting.
Which is something the president is quite big on. And we understand that we can't domicile if we're not productive. And you can't be productive without technology. So the president, for instance, is mandated that we have to train technical talent en masse, because that's the requirement for you to be able to apply technology. So Nigeria is going on a drive of training millions of technical talent, not only for local consumption, we also want to be net exporter of technical talent as well. So our biggest investment is going to be going in there. And I keep telling people, don't look down on countries like Nigeria, because this is one country that you can look at any top research institution in the world. There's a Nigerian somewhere.
For sure.
There. And we're going to be building bridges to ensure we can connect these talents back home to help leapfrog what we want to see.
So you're basically saying we're coming, we're on our way.
I'm saying it. We are.
You've given me a beautiful segue to Christine, actually, because you talking about how we can, invest in this talent is exactly what Christine is doing. Her story is quite amazing, right? You were born in New York, and then your family took you as a baby, basically, to Port-au-Prince, Haiti. In Port-au-Prince, Haiti, you refused to sit down. You actually started as street vending. But you weren't selling sort of like roasted corn or anything. You were selling actually, what were you selling on the streets of Port-au-Prince?
Like handcrafted.
Handcrafted stuff. And then at some stage, you decided to teach yourself coding. And then you taught yourself coding, and that took you on this journey where now you're influencing tens of thousands of people. Tell us exactly what you're doing. I know because I've spoken to you, but tell them just some of the things you're doing in Nigeria. Actually, you know Bosun quite well from his previous manifestation. And in Ghana as well, you're working as well. Tell them what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. So essentially what you said, we invest in the talent that's on the African continent. Essentially, a global startup ecosystem, our mission is to prepare young people for the digital age. And we do that by pretty much running digital talent career accelerator programs where we're training them to upskill them for pretty much what's happening in the future, whether it's tech skills or business entrepreneurial skills. And we also are the organization that powers some of the biggest tech summit brands that you probably recognize around the world, whether it's Ghana Tech Summit, Nigeria Tech Summit, Afro Future Summit. We are the ones that power those programs around the world. But how I got into that, when I first got into the tech space in 2014, my first startup, it's accelerated so well because emerging markets is such a big point of conversation in emerging markets. And within 2 years, I not only made the Forbes list with that company, but I became pretty much a global speaker, speaking about emerging markets, tech talent, and people across the diaspora at the time. And I realized there wasn't a lot of support for tech talent in the Caribbean and Africa. So one day I just posted on social media, hey, I will teach people my journey and teach them how to build and scale in the tech space. And went viral, and our first cohort, it was about 900 people from the Caribbean. We scaled it to Africa. To today, we're literally the go-to platform for Forbes, IDB, Google, Facebook, you name it, have worked with us over the past, pretty much within the past decade to accelerate talent across the African continent. And what excites me, especially with this, summit and this program, this platform, is that we already know the narratives around Africa has shifted. We already know that the talent right now, we all know that the future talent of the world is going to be on the African continent. It's not a debate anymore. And to be behind the scenes powering that through our summits and through our accelerators truly is inspiring. From where I started to where I am today, it's really nice to see, especially even your journey, how you started being a facilitator. You're usually behind the scenes, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? When you're accelerating other people, you're usually behind the scenes. So now be the one accelerating to another level is truly empowering.
And you must have seen in that, because you create a platform, people come in, and then you're not often really involved in all these things that shoot out of it. You're just sort of sitting back. You're not, so you bring people together and they create new things, right? What have you seen in that space? Because that must be really inspiring when you hear stories back from the fact that you've been responsible for crowding people in the same space with the same ideology and the same aspirations.
Yeah, extremely inspiring. Everywhere from people getting jobs through our summits and accelerators to people starting their own incubator hubs in spaces that we never thought was possible, to even marriages, families.
When people got married?
Haiti Tech Summit is one of the summits where power people have given us all types of stories because at the end of the day, we're dealing with people, right? So it's not the work that they do, but the lives that they live. And we're powering, not only enabling them to accelerate their talent across the continent, but also live a life of purpose and meaning. And so to see that happen on a regular basis, there's no words to describe that.
Yeah, because you always say, grow up to be yourself.
Yes.
I think is your mantra, right?
Yes.
Edem, talking about partnerships and talking about bringing people together, I think if I was to kind of describe you, and I know you well, we've worked together closely on many things. If I was to describe you, that's actually your superpower. The idea that you bring these sometimes opposing, when you get two magnets and you put them the wrong way around and they don't sort of connect, you bring people into the same space to collaborate, to co-create and co-initiate programs. And you of course also come up with ideas and make them happen because of that. Tell them a little bit about some of the things you've done in trade and in health.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks. Happy to be here. Well, let me sketch a background first. I mean, I've been listening over the past 2 days, and a lot of the conversations is talking about the amazing things that's happening on the continent and the partnerships that are being formed. But we all knew that, taking digital finance, for example, long before that became even prominent in the global north, Africa was doing really, really cutting-edge stuff in the area of, digital finance, right? And even before, or even after, M-Pesa became a byword in, digital finance, adaptive thinking in terms of innovation, Africa is still and continues to do much, much more in mobile banking, more than any other parts in the world. The same applies in the area of health and in trade. It is in Africa that we've seen drones delivering medicines across the continent. It is in Africa that people are building products, even after the US has been talking about doing radical design around how it's going to change its healthcare net. But it's in Africa that we see insurance products being built on health, and with also analyzing people's behavior and toolkits built around it, and many, many, many more. The reason I mention these things, and if you go into trade as well, I mean, lots of amazing things happening in incubator hubs across the continent, allowing SMEs and startups to be able to trade and make business among themselves. The challenge, though, is that they never scale. They never scale because you almost have to keep replicating the experience in one country after the other. Regulatory barriers, logistical barriers,
So you feel like you're going back to the beginning every time.
Exactly. And so the approach we've taken at Afro Champions is to, first of all, identify that there are champions that exist doing things on the continent that don't necessarily need grants, they don't need aid, they just need visibility. They just need interconnectivity. They just need access to market. And access to market eventually, then finance can come in. And so what we've done is build a multi-stakeholder platforms that aggregate existing platforms, because we have to recognize that platforms exist. We have to recognize incubators like what my sister and brother are talking about exist. And design mechanisms by which they can talk to each other, they can integrate, and then bring regulators on board and make it possible for them to be able to ride on the back of this barrier. So these hips and ashes that divide us, building platforms on top of them and erect them on multi-stakeholder platforms that make it possible for us to be able to trade and do health across the continent. So 2 examples of what we've done. During the pandemic, we brought together, again, using the legitimacy of Africa CDC, working with the African Union, being able to go to countries, recognizing that some of them are digital platforms for COVID, others didn't. We're able to now build a platform with the support of Africa CDC to connect 28 countries on the continent on a common platform, connected labs across the continent, connected Port Health, built a Port Health interoperability system that was linked to genomic centers. So almost within a period of 6 months, ahead of even Europe and other parts of the continent, we had onboarded 80 million people who were using the trusted travel platform, making it easy for tests done in one country to be verified in another. And then once we now connected to vaccine data sites, vaccine systems across the continent, and now connecting with genomics, we're already, with machine learning algorithms, understanding how variants were moving onto the continent, where they were coming from, among others. The same experience we've had, now that we've built a public good, we have lots of startups now innovating on top of that. People doing things in clinical trials, digital clinical trials, among others, who never knew they even existed on the continent. So we're impressed with that. This could never happen without the very unique multi-stakeholder approach of that dance between public sector, intergovernmental legitimacy, what I call the 4Ds, intergovernmental, departmental legitimacy, dimensional framing from civil society, directional flow of resources, and more importantly, disciplinary importance coming from academic institutions and research scientists. Trade is no different. I mean, we're now onboarding regulators. Most people talk of trade and just think about selling, but it's really about, if you're going to trade amongst a continent that has no road and rail infrastructure, digital trade for me is probably the quickest thing to do. So onboarding regulators in customs standards across the continent is really, really giving visibility to SMEs to be able to understand markets beyond theirs.
And I want to segue there because the AFCFTA is the big deal, right? If you think about post-independence for Africa, right, where our African pioneers were wanting to throw off the shackles of colonialism. That was the big. This is also almost like 2.0 in terms of how we want to integrate the continent. We want to trade with each other. We want to raise lives and livelihoods and so on. Nigeria is the big giant when it comes to the economy, not just in West Africa, but across the continent, right? It has to globally lead when it comes to intra-Africa trade, when it comes to boosting our exports. You have an obligation. Now, you're the digital minister, and we're talking about digital trade. So you've got, ipso facto, you've got a big job to play in terms of being a master integrator, using technology to boost the AFCFTA's aspirations and those of millions of people around Africa. That's on your shoulders to a great degree to inspire. What's the plan?
It's an area I'm extremely passionate about. I think 3 years ago, I gathered over about 100 people from close to 30 countries in Africa together in Kigali. So most of these people were largely technology ecosystem builders, tech entrepreneurs. And we started what we call the ATCG, which is Africa Technology and Creative Economic Group. And the sole purpose is how do we bring the conversation around a single market to the grassroots? Because at the end of the day, the folks that will make it happen are those who are producing but also exporting as well. And we totally understand that digital trade is the way to go. So we extended that by working with Meta, for instance, to build an intelligence platform that can literally show you what each African country can export to the rest of the continent based on trade gap and social connectedness. So this is something that we've already made public. And since assuming office, one thing I've been pushing is actually to ensure that Nigeria is at the forefront of the single market. Because if it's going to happen, it has to be Nigeria, right? If you look at the size of the market, the number of entrepreneurs, we can literally consume whatever is coming from Rwanda or Ghana easily. Easily we can do that. So if it's ever
spoken like a true Nigerian.
No, but that's the honest truth. The market size is there. So we can take in goods, but we also have the capacity and the capability to also export as well. So one of the biggest, and this is not an announcement, it's part of the plan that I'm putting out on the 2nd of October. And I've been engaging the president on this, the Minister of Finance, also our Minister of Investments and Trade, is that we intend to have like Africa Trade Center in Lagos, where anyone coming from anywhere in Africa wants to do business with Nigeria. That's your one-stop shop to get all the support you need. And in a week, you can register your company, have your virtual office, get a few set of employees that you may need to be able to trade. But the intention is that as we open up, we also want the rest of the continent to open up to African entrepreneurs. But in digital trade, for instance, you know that one of the largest unicorns in the tech space in Africa is Flutterwave. And Flutterwave, I think they are in over 30 African countries. So we're already selling across Africa. CC Hub that I founded is also in 4 African countries. We do business in 17. So the Nigerians are used to trading, and we're used to trading across the continent. We're used to trading in digital trade as well. So this is a priority for me that we need to also ensure that the ECI trade index for Nigeria is actually up. And one of the areas in which we're quite low is in technology trade. Because we also have the challenge where most of our technology companies are not domiciled in our country. Most of them are in Delaware. And so it doesn't count for us when they trade with the rest of Africa.
Right, okay.
That counts as American trade.
American trade, American dollars.
So the government is intentional about ensuring the policies can actually encourage them.
That's localization in it from a digital perspective. Christine, from your perspective, one thing I want to talk about is women and youth, right? Because when we talk about digital trade and things like that, we're instantly thinking of educated people who've been to university and are actually kind of like living in the cities and so on. But a lot of trade that happens informally by people who have no formal education, they're not highly skilled, they're low skilled, and they're making up a vast majority of the trade that is crossing at borders. Go to any border in Africa and you will see them there. You've seen them there. You've been to borders, Adam, and they need to harness this brave new future, even AI, right? You've been supporting them with your summits, your mega summits, I think, is that what you call them, mega summits? Tell us what you think should happen for women and youth, because you're very passionate about that.
Oh, very, very, especially as a wife and as a mother of four. I will tell you that, you know, first and foremost, women have already been doing it. I want to start there because we need to make sure people know that we were here, right? And so when I think about, you know, women in informal markets, I mean, like, majority of street vendors are usually female. So when you talk about fintech and what's powering Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, across the African continent, they're already on Momo, right? They're already selling and making money on these platforms. So now, what I would say happened during the pandemic in 2020, people opened their eyes beyond just transaction financial value, but now how do I get visible with technology? That's the change, because women have already been there, but how did it get more visible leveraging technology? And one thing that has been really powerful for our summits and our accelerator programs is that now we're seeing more and more women, especially young females, who are just starting their careers, you know, graduating from college. One thing that I shared with you before, that not only corporate Fortune 500 companies come to us to help scale digital talent across Africa, but also now governments are reaching out to us, especially because across the African continent, many have like a one-year national service scheme, right? Nigeria has it, Ghana
National Youth
has
Service Corps in Nigeria.
You know, so that's thousands of youth who are entering the workforce, and it's supposed to be an experimental year, right? Where they're able to understand the workforce before they start their career. How many of them are upskilled? Right? If you look at Ghana's database, it's about 90,000 influencers every single year who are coming into the marketplace. So now we're supporting, we're like actually skilling those individuals coming through that national service scheme, and obviously going through that across the continent. So part of the problem is now trying to make sure more women are hearing that. And one thing that helps, when we see women leading the mantle, they come out. Right? So when they see a mother or wife who's also in the tech space doing these things, they come out and they leverage these resources to really accelerate not only their growth, but also what they do for their families. The last thing I would say when it comes to women and youth is that we need to be very, very careful about how we inspire the younger generation. A lot of people blame COVID for a lot of the challenges and the coups that's happening across the African continent, but there's a lot that was happening prior pandemic. In 2019, there was like young people taken to the streets. If we don't channel that energy in a positive direction, we're gonna lose out on the biggest opportunity that we could have had in global humanity. We need to tap into that youth workforce, because we already know the youngest youth population by 2050 is going to be on the African continent. What are we gonna do with that workforce that is so ready? They've been ready, they're waiting for us to catch up. So I cannot wait to see how, when we see a conferences, when we talk about Unstoppable Africa, how we're gonna tap into young people and women, not because it sounds nice, but because we know that if we don't do this today, we're starting our growth in the future. And so that's what we're seeing, that's what we're doing with Global Startup Ecosystem. And I'm incredibly excited every day to see that, you know, when it comes to what's happening on the African continent, that women now, they're not shy about saying, hey, I'm here, I'm ready, tap into me and let's go. Yeah.
There's about 90 seconds or 1 minute left. Edem, you have the last word. We don't know what's happening in the future. We know it could be exciting. Are you optimistic about this misty optic?
Extremely optimistic for two reasons. One is, from my experience with what we've done, it's not there's no shortage of expertise and competences on the continent, and the genuineness of the partners that want to work with the continent. What we lack is, you know, the innovation of how to work together. There's just so much brilliant people doing amazing things. The innovation is not, the technology future is not building another technology. They're already being done. It's how do you bring all of those ecosystem players to work together? And that, for me, is the innovation. That's one. Because if we don't architect it properly, where we're bringing those who have the legitimacy, those who have the ability to scale, those who have the resources, but co-creating and co-sharing, we're not going to get anywhere. We're just going to be reinventing wheels. Secondly, is to understand that the real force of any change is local. And until you build systems and platforms, the idea of creating those monolithic systems and technology that you want to get 55 countries on the continent to adopt and all of that, I mean, even the declarations that our heads of states make with the greatest of intent and things like that don't mostly get implemented, right? So those monolithic things won't work. It's really working within what exists within the informal structure, aggregating that into platforms that again gets you working your way from the street to the podium as opposed to from the podium to the street. So I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to end with a mini poem, actually. I show up for women. I show up for Africa. I show up for the Caribbean. I show up for Haiti. I show up for Ghana. I show up for New York. I show up for women in business, mothers in tech. I show up for you. Let's connect. That was Christine's poem 2 days ago on Twitter. Our tech superstars.